That's the good stuff, That's the good stuff.
I was like, oh, I get to be with Rick Wilson. I'm like, God.
Well,
you where's
are
my
now
cocktail though? Where's my cocktail?
Right? Damn it. See, that we need to invent teleportation. So, hey, everybody, it's Rick. Happy Friday afternoon. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by my friend Katie Phang, who has become one of the absolute rock stars of Substack. And I told her, I think I was the first one to tell you, I was like, you'd be great at this. You would kill at this.
You were. I mean, I appreciate the flattery of being able to kick ass on Substack, but I will say, you know what? It is partially me, but it's mainly the community.
It really
Substack community is so forgiving. They don't mind the techie glitches here or there. They don't mind the lack of fancy stuff going on. They're just here to hang out and to kind of learn and be in community and to support. And I got to tell you, that's what makes it organically one of the best places to be, a Substack.
I can't tell you, every day I talk to the folks that interact with my page and with the content I do. And I get smart questions. I get direct feedback. I get some people, and I'm open to being criticized. People sometimes say, hey, you went too long on that one, or maybe shouldn't use the F-bomb so much in this one. Which is, all constructive.
There's both of us now then. Yeah, right. Whoever that person is, they should
Sorry, you might want to tune this one down. No,
but the earplugs in now.
But I mean, it really has become this place where a lot of us who were fixtures and either guests or hosts on the old mainstream media have found a better way to communicate with the people that give a damn. I mean, that's where I sort of sense it.
Well, and what's interesting is that YouTube is also a great place, right? Because that's great. But YouTube can be a little, when I say cold sometimes, it means there's no real live interaction, right? I mean, you could do a YouTube live, but I guess what I'm trying to say is with Substack, I feel like there's this constant flow of energy. It's people sending comments, people liking stuff, people restacking stuff, people, dropping comments in the chat.
100%.
I mean, that is what I enjoy the most, because it's kind of the reaffirmation or the affirmation of, hey, we're kind of in this together in the truest of senses, right? It's not just you and I talking to somebody or at somebody, right? We're all kind of in the mix. And you're right. Some people have spectacular ideas, and some people are lending some constructive criticism. That's well taken. And that's part of the reason why I enjoy hanging out. And then honestly, too, it's being able to hang out with you, right? So you and I have been friends for a while, but other than running into each other at certain events, our time spent was like a 4-minute hit on MSNBC, right? And that is woefully inadequate to spend time with Rick Wilson.
Opinions vary, but thank you. But I mean, we have this, and we have this world, I think, where people are mistrustful of anyone with a different perspective. And I think Substack is helping a little bit because it is a more considered medium. And we're in this moment where the chaos level, like we're in a chaos, like overload situation all the time. And I think people feel more clarity here than they do certainly on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok. I think there's a more sense of like, you can find the information that's validated and serious, and that real people are sharing it.
I also think, Rick, and that's such a great point, because all of those other social media platforms still exist, and they're still there. And listen, I still post on Blue Sky, for example, and Thread. But sometimes on those other platforms, you kind of have to weed through so much of the bullshit to get to where you want to be. It's like kind of being in the mist, and that the road is there, and you're kind of looking for familiarity of signposts. And sometimes you get there easily and sometimes you don't. The thing about Substack is it's not so much content moderation. It's not so much somebody kind of gatekeeping the content. It's more, I know that I can get my information from a reliable source like Rick Wilson, and then I know that I get Rick Wilson on steroids, right? On something versus, hey, maybe I only get my limited characters of Rick on Twitter, or like my limited characters of Rick on Blue Sky or something,
Yeah. Or that 4 minutes of, you got to rush through and try to compress 10 big ideas into 4 minutes on TV. And it doesn't always work. Even when people know what they're doing, it doesn't always work. So one of the things that I think you're you've been amazing here on, is starting to bring in more of your legal perspective on stuff, especially in your 1 minute show, which I think, like bang, 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 you go through it. And it's just like, it's a perfect piece of content and education at the same time. But I was thinking about this earlier today when I was thinking about this interview. We really are at a moment where the intersection of politics and the law has never been more central to the future of this country.
Like,
so
who would have thunk it, right?
Who would have thunk it? I mean, it was always this sort of vibe of like, okay, well, the law bats clean up after the politics are over.
True.
And now
used to be.
There's a real sense that without the law and the justice system, that the politics will turn in a very dark direction very quickly. So I'm really grateful for the way you've been an explainer and a translator for a lot of people who they rather than them taking one line off of somebody else's Twitter feed, you give them a perspective and a context on a lot of the legal stuff about the depth of this fight. And we're having to face those things every day with ICE and DHS and executive powers and Trump's incredibly expansive view of what the executive office of the president can do.
Yeah, I think there was a time that we kind of traditionally thought that law and politics were kind of running on parallel tracks. And look, and even the most obvious of senses, and this too, a lot of politicians are lawyers by trade, right?
Sure.
Before they end up serving in Congress or politics, whatever. But in this moment, they are so inextricably intertwined. I mean, you cannot explain a policy or you cannot explain a political maneuver without having some accompanying legal consequence to it, right?
100%.
And more importantly, when it comes to co-equal branches of government, we're finding that the judiciary is in some places not asserting themselves as much as they should, but kind of having its heyday, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the judiciary has always been an important component of democracy and American government, but it was always kind of short-thrifted a little bit, because to your original point, it was maybe the place that you went after something went awry.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't kind of the first place that you would go to be able to find it, to fix the problem. But we are finding now that there is proactive moves to go to court to stop things from happening in the first instance, which, isn't new to the law, but is certainly new, I think, to politics at this point, frankly.
I think the scale of it happening is new. I think and I think the urgency of it is also new, because it's the things that this administration keeps proposing on a wide spectrum. And the immigration stuff, I think, is probably, 50% of these cases.
At least. Yeah,
maybe.
At least. Yeah.
But a lot of it about executive powers and birthright citizenship and the executive order, reliance and all these things. None of this in a country that functions. A lot of the things they're proposing are facially unconstitutional and illegal. And so, I mean, do you ever feel frustrated when you see the courts either slow rolling it or bring us a better case or wait and see? I mean, I worry that some of these things that are so consequential are not, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, are not getting the immediate attention that they should.
So I have a little bit of a multi-prong answer. One, I think there are so many things that are going on, Rick, that sometimes we do a disservice because we don't continue to focus on an issue that has serious significance for all Americans, right? Mm-hmm. But that is largely in part because it's like drinking from a fire hose on a daily basis. There is never a day that is going to be a quote slow news day ever again. And part of that, as we know, is a part of the I was going to say strategery, the strategy on the part of Trump and others. What did Bannon say? Just flood the zone with shit or bullshit, right? Flood the zone, which is what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But I also think, I mean, I am notoriously impatient. My husband likes to say I am the queen of the Phang impatience. I am impatient because I think that kind of like you and I finding our space and staking our claim in independent media. Mm-hmm. I always say you have to meet the urgency of the moment with the urgency of the message. Right. And I think even the judiciary has to realize that there is an urgency. And listen, there are rules of procedure that dictate time. Time is literally defined in rules of procedure. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Criminal and civil. And so it's not like a judge can say, whatever, fuck it, I'm going to do whatever I want to do at this time frame. And yet he or she can, because sometimes you can have an expediency move that happens in a case or whatever. I also have been waxing and complaining loudly about, I think, a lack of kind of teeth to some of the stuff that's going on, a lack of defined and clear sanctions in order to deter bad conduct that we're seeing from the Trump administration on a legal basis. And then I also see the rampant abuse of the shadow docket on the Supreme Court. The number of emergency applications that have been made by the Trump administration exceeds any in known history.
So
And
explain the shadow docket to our listeners who are not as up on it as I obsess about it. It bothers the shit out of me. But explain to folks what the shadow docket does and is.
So the shadow docket has become a politically expedient weapon for the Republicans, especially in the Trump administration's plural, Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. So normally, the Supreme Court grants what we call a petition for writ of certiorari, meaning the Supreme Court has the luxury of deciding what cases it wants to take, versus some that have to be filed and have to be heard by a district court or another court or an appeals court. So that is a regular audit or a docket or kind of like a set of cases that is heard on term. So you hear the Supreme Court spoken about spring term, whatever term, right? But other than that, what happens is once in a while, as it was supposed to be, there is this thing called the shadow docket that takes cases on an emergency basis, kind of takes them out of turn. So instead of waiting to be able to have it travel in a traditional sense of district court to appeals court to Supreme Court, if it takes it, sometimes the Supreme Court will take a case out of turn. But then sometimes the Supreme Court, when it takes that case out of turn, will make a decision on that case that has an incredible impact, but it hasn't been heard through oral arguments, for example. And so it's just been briefed in the tiniest of ways, but it has this huge consequential impact on America. That shadow docket, as it's called, because it's done almost in secrecy, is not a part of the regular docket for the Supreme Court. And so what we're having is, for example, you're having decisions rendered by the Supreme Court as late as today, which is June 20th. And you normally don't have it as late as now because a lot of those regular cases just weren't heard because so many emergency applications were made, again, because it's been politically expedient for the Trump administration, because they see the uber conservative majority of 6 sitting on the Supreme Court, and they're racing to be able to get things done by the Supreme Court before the case has had its chance to wind its way in the typical course.
I had a former White House counsel say to me the other day that part of his theory of the shadow docket and this sub rosa push for all this stuff. He said there's a weird vibe inside the White House that eventually Roberts and Comey Barrett will feel like they're the switch keepers, they're the gatekeepers, and that there's a sense in the White House there that they may not have as open and shut a fair hearing or good hearing on every single case as they've had with a lot of things so far. They don't think they're going to get another Trump v. United States decision out of this court, and they're starting to feel a little shaky about it, and it's in part because they obsess about Comey Barrett. They are so angry with her. And look, she's still with them 90% of the time.
I was going to say she has been a wild card as of late, and then you get something like the Scrimetti decision, right, on the Tennessee ban on the gender affirming care for the trans youth, and she writes this absurd concurrence where she says that trans people pretty much aren't even a quasi suspect class, right? I mean, there are things, and it's funny because honestly, Rick, I would actually turn this back on you and ask you this because I felt like Amy Coney Barrett. And this is me just, kind of practicing medicine without a license here. Like, I kind of felt like she was hell-bent about the abortion issue. I feel like Amy Coney Barrett was the kind of Roe v. Wade, I'm putting you on SCOTUS. I know how you feel. You have like 30 children, I know how you feel. You're an uber Catholic, pro-life, whatever. And so she got on SCOTUS and she rendered, she dialed in and she put in for the Dobbs decision. And then I feel like somebody like her is a true conservative in the kind of old school senses. And she has to be offended to the core by the very nature of a Donald Trump. Somebody like Kavanaugh, somebody like Alito or freaking Thomas, whatever. They're so transactional, right? They're so just grossly transactional.
They live in they essentially have become like trolls on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but I feel like Amy Coney Barrett, and this is why I'm asking you, I kind of feel like she's asserting herself in certain ways and become the unpredictable one that the, Leonard Leos and the Federalist Society get pissed off about because she's like, I would never break bread with this asshole. Like I would never break bread with Donald Trump in my real life, right? I'm going to do it. But then again, like I said, she's still siding with the uber conservative majority when she can.
Most of the time. And I will say this, she was a sort of known quantity for the last 15 years in conservative circles. And there was this understanding that she is a extraordinarily religious.
Yes.
That abortion and was the central driving issue of a lot of her activism side. And I think you're right. There's some vestigial conservatism of the old school, not the populism. Dobbs is in the rearview mirror now. That was the Mount Everest of the Federalist Society for a generation.
Exactly.
She climbed it. She conquered it.
Yeah.
And now I do think there is a certain level of distaste that she has for the chaos and the noise and the intolerance and the inhumanity of these people. Even though she has some positions that are pretty inhumane, she would rather do it politely and quietly than with the loud ugliness of the things like the Tennessee decision. So she voted with it. She concurred on it, but it wasn't this. Her heart's not in the same space as she's been with Dobbs and Roe. She was the guided missile built by Leonard Leo to help destroy Roe. She was.
And by the way, and we're seeing the break. We're seeing the break from the White House with Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society over Emile Bove, who, by the way, has his hearing coming up next week.
Right.
For the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And so Emile Bove, former personal lawyer for Donald Trump, lost the criminal trials, by the way, who has been serving as, I think, deputy AG or something like that. Some random ass job at DOJ with Todd Blanche, another kind of Trump lackey. But, there's been a notable, very visible public split on that issue. And I think there's kind of like this reassertion of, I won't say it because you guys are too polite here on the show, but they're kind of like reasserting themselves, saying, "Hey, I'm still here." Like don't count me out, kind of thing. And I feel like that's what we're seeing from some of the old school conservatives, I guess is what I'll call them.
One thing that I think the Trump administration has underestimated is that the list of judges that was given to him in the first administration, in the first term, was developed by Leonard Leo. It was looked at and vetted by Mitch McConnell, who said, I can pass this guy, and this guy. I can't do this woman and that guy and this guy. And it was a crafted thing that used this mechanism that the Federal Society and Leonard Leo's PR firm, CRC, and Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino and all those people, all these complicated moving parts that were lubricated by huge amounts of money to make sure that all these nominees went through. Like, boom. They had relationships with staff in the Senate. They had relationships with the senators. They had friendships. They would do advertising to say, shouldn't you be proud of Senator John Smith for supporting this nominee? They're so conservative. That's all gone now. Leonard's done. Trump attacked him. Leo, from what I'm told by people close to him, feels like he got a middle finger from Trump. I sent the message back, like, what did you actually expect in the end? Was he really one of your people? Because you used him.
Never really one of their people. He was just a useful idiot.
Correct.
And now it's like Dr. Frankenstein creating the monster, and now the monster's wreaking havoc and running amok. And Dr. Frankenstein's a little bit like, oh well, shit, what just happened? Well, you created the monster.
Somebody the other day had a kind of grim joke, like if Clarence Thomas drops dead on Harlan Crow's yacht this summer, there's a non-zero chance he's going to want Judge Janine, Judge Box of Wine on the Supreme Court. I mean, it's
like,
not
or
out
like
of the
Alina
question.
Habba. No. It's Eileen Cannon, honey.
Oh.
He'll just bypass the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which everybody says she's being tagged or eyeballed for. He'll just bypass the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and he'll just go straight on up to SCOTUS.
And at this point, Katie, why wouldn't he? He knows how she's going to help him.
I was going to say, it would be beyond the rubber stamping experience to be able to have her on SCOTUS, right? But listen, to follow this vein a little bit more, though, Rick, somebody like Eileen Cannon, though, I think would offend Amy Coney Barrett in that way, though, because on its face, it would just be so grossly transactionally a reward. And I think that that's not how she is. But you know what? Listen, I have to always be careful about imputing too much good intent to those people on SCOTUS. Sometimes I'm like,
so true.
But
I will say this about Barrett. I do not think, unlike Thomas and Kavanaugh in particular, I do not think Barrett is fundamentally unethical.
No, I don't either. And by the way, I don't think that she's like, Harlan Crow kind of shit. Like,
Right.
no.
Right. I don't
No.
think she's like, oh, well, fly me on your private jet to a legal conference where I get to speak
Mm,
for 5 minutes and then I stay there for 2 weeks in vacation at a 5-star resort. That's not. I don't think that's her vibe.
no, I would concur with that. And listen, from just legal community talk, she is not. She is not like
Yeah.
that, right? Like,
Yeah.
as in, she's
Yeah.
not Harlan Crow recruitable, I guess.
Yeah. So moving on for the Supreme Court, well, it may loop back to it. So I think some of the most important cases right now are, ironically, because I came from the Republican Party, we had a lot of guys who carried a pocket constitution all the time, and who in the 2000s screamed about the 10th Amendment.
But never dog-eared. Did it
Never
always have
dog-eared. No,
perfect spine?
right.
Perfect spine,
Always
never
just so they
broken.
could hold it up for the camera. Uh, I think one of the most important things, they used to bitch about the 10th Amendment. It was a through line of so many Republican critiques of Barack Obama and of Bill Clinton and of Democrats more broadly. I think California, weirdly, has had some of the most important defense of the prerogatives of the states because of the National Guard case and because of these other cases on immigration that they're bringing, more so than any conservative state has ever done.
Well, we only ran away from the Supreme Court for a hot fucking second, because now we're back. Because
Right, I know.
because but let's think about this, right? Because we're having this conversation about federalism, right? We're having this
Yeah.
conversation about states' rights, and you look at the Dobbs decision, right? And obviously it overturned Roe v. Wade. But what did it do? It, along with other maybe gun cases, for example, from SCOTUS,
Bruin.
it brought back states' rights assertions of their powers to be
Right.
able to dictate what their citizens and residents did within the confines of the jurisdiction of their state. And you look at somebody like Florida, for example, with crazy Ron DeSantis and everything that he tries to do within his own state. And then you juxtapose that with Gavin Newsom, for example, in California and others. You would think that Republicans wanting to embrace this idea of states' rights would be so mindful of not overstepping. But in this instance, and obviously we just had this decision come out from the Ninth Circuit, but the idea that Trump or even the federal government in some way could supplant the discretion of a state governor, well, there you go. That seems to be the case, but it flies in the face of everything.
I mean,
would be a traditional federalist kind of argument,
I know a lot of them expect that we're never going to have another Democratic president, but I asked this counterfactual to my Republican friends a lot. Like, what happens if someday it's President Gavin Newsom or President Pete Buttigieg who says, you know what? Nope, I don't like your gun laws in your state. I'm sending in masked federal agents to seize you and seize your guns.
And what do they say?
What do they say at that? Oh, they freak out. Oh, no, that's the real Constitution.
I can't take my guns.
That's the real.
Right.
That's the Second Amendment. And look, as a gun guy, I don't want anybody coming into my house with a mask and no badge and no warrant and unmarked vehicles, all that stuff.
I have been telling people, Rick, we are lucky that we have not had more deadly violence. Because stand your ground. I'm telling you, those laws are really messed up. And somebody's going to assert stand your ground, and it is going to be ugly when that happens.
Let me tell you something. Again, I think that the risk that I truly believe that the masked, unnamed, no warrants, unmarked vehicles, all that stuff is very secret police shit. It's very bad for a democracy.
It's very banana republic, like, autocratic, dictator, communist, whatever you want to call it. People, disappearing of people is a very common thing in Latin American countries, et cetera. Like North Korea, like, I mean, this is how they roll. Like China, like this is how they roll there. And the disappearing of people in the United States, in 2025, it's wild.
So one of my questions is, I mean, we essentially have DHS now, essentially as a rogue agency. They do not listen to court orders. They do not obey court orders. They are told over and over again, don't deport this person until there's a hearing. They deport them. They're told, don't do the following sorts of snatch and grab stuff. They do it anyway. What is the court's recourse on this at this point with this administration?
So we have a few federal judges, James Boasberg, Paula
Mhm.
Zinnes, for example, that are going down the pathways of contempt.
Right.
And listen, and this is why I tell people I get it. I am impatient and I wish things were moving faster, but there is a process that has to be
Right.
adhered to, because if you don't, then it's reversible, right? It's an error that's reversible on appeal. And, and I also caution people, I wouldn't, even though would like to see, I wouldn't expect people being hauled off onto jail.
No.
Although what I do think you could do is I think you could make the administration a lot more uncomfortable vis-a-vis dragging into court, though, the Kristi Noems, the Marco Rubios, the Tom Homans. I think
Yes.
part of the problem are the lawyers for the administration that are making representations and being disrespectful. That is, refer them to the bar if you're a judge. That is, get them sanctioned in some way. But they're just the mouthpieces for the
Sure.
parties. And the parties are DHS and ICE and the State Department. Those people have actual leaders in the Kristi Noems, Tom Homan, and Marco Rubios. Those are the people that you bring into court. And those are the people that you grill publicly. Those are the people that you put under oath and say, why did your State Department or why did your Department of Homeland Security ignore my court order? You don't even leave it up to someone else to be able to do this. The judge, him or herself, does the grilling. I think that's where the pressure points have to happen because, Rick, I know you agree with me. Trump has surrounded himself with just ass kissers and sycophants. They are not competent and they are not strong people. They're only bold because they have the power of the president behind them. But when you kind of separate them and you cull the herd a little bit, and if you make them Johnny on the spot to have to answer questions, they're going to fold. They're going to fold. They're not going to be able to hold their own when it comes to this.
That's the other thing I think that is sort of a pendant political question is if the Democrats recapture the House, and there's a very good possibility of that. Many slip between the cup and the lip, but there's a very good chance of that. I think some of the legal pressure on them will also be paralleled with some of the, Congress exercising its oversight role with against them. In a Democratic-led majority. I want to ask you about Congress a little bit and about the sort of things we saw with Senator Padilla, with Brad Lander in New York, with members of Congress being arrested for approaching DHS agents or approaching their facilities. Talk to me about the legality of what's happening there, and talk to me about Congress has a constitutionally defined oversight power.
100%.
And how that is expressed is not always in a hearing. Sometimes it's by a member of Congress going out and saying, "What the fuck's going on here, Chief?"
Well, but I will raise this criticism of the Democrats and of Republicans too, right? This congressional oversight role, it's called oversight, and it shouldn't only be happening now. So let's be very honest, right? The immigration system in the United States is broken, and it has been broken under Democratic presidents, Republican presidents, different administrations, right?
Sure.
So, but instead of maybe, putting funding in to get more immigration judges, instead of getting, beefing up our immigration system with funding, we're obviously just kidnapping people and deporting them to countries that they're not even from. But when it comes to the oversight here, this is they're entitled to go to these facilities and check them out.
Right.
Some of it's starting to look a little performative, frankly, right? And it irritates me to no end again, but it should be done because it just highlights exactly how recalcitrant and completely hardcore obfuscation is being pursued by the Republicans in this instance, right? But what happened to Padilla, he never looked at any charges. He was never charged with a crime, right?
Well, they got their video clip on Fox News, and they were
exactly right. So Kristi Noem should be hauled in to have to answer questions as to how she bald-faced lied to the American people and said that Padilla never identified himself, and he just was some man that lunged at me. I had no idea.
Lunged at me from 50 feet away.
Smelling salt,
right?
Screaming my smelling salt.
Where's my fainting couch?
Yes. Oh my. Like she should have to be hauled in front of Congress to have to answer this. And I think this kind of goes with what you just said, which is, I am kind of tired of the kind of propriety that the Democrats have been ascribing to.
Oh,
Listen,
God.
when the Democrats take back the House, when we have a Democratic president again, when we have control, there has to be some serious fucking investigation.
Absolutely.
I am tired of this idea that we need to just quote move on, that we need to move on from that ugly time.
Trust me.
And whatever.
I was writing a book chapter today about that very thing.
Oh,
Like this whole my
we're
honorable
supposed to go.
this whole my honorable friend bullshit. I'm like, I said this to a Democratic congressman about a year and a half ago. He goes, I've always gotten along with so-and-so who, even though he's a J6 guy, I'm like,
Well,
they sent people to kill you. They
What?
sent people to kill you. What the fuck is wrong with your brain? They're not your honorable friend anymore, folks.
There's no redemption path for them. You know how they have redemption arcs and stories, with characters, whatever.
Right.
This is not fiction. This is real fucking life. And when you consider somebody who has aligned themselves with somebody like Donald Trump, there really is no redemption arc for you. So what needs to happen is, even if you're not even in office anymore, you need to be held accountable for what you have done. And part of the accountability and part of moving on is making people actually have to tell the truth, right? Remember how when we had our 2020 election and Trump lost, fair and square, he lost. Remember how we had our cases that wound their way through the judicial system when we, prosecuted Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, and we had defamation lawsuits brought by fantastically strong, brave people to prove the truth of what happened in that election, right?
Right.
We gained ground and now we've lost it. Like, I just interviewed Brendan Ballou today, and he
Sure.
former DOJ prosecutor who prosecuted the January 6th insurrectionists, private practice. He's now representing officers Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges in a lawsuit to get a January 6th memorial plaque put up that was passed into law more than 3 fucking years ago and hasn't gone up, probably courtesy of House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Yep.
They are attempting to rewrite history and right before our own eyes. If you are culpable in this, you must be held to account. I don't understand why this is so hard for people to understand. It doesn't mean you're vindictive. It just means you are a truth teller. And there has never been anything wrong in the course of history about telling the truth.
And it means you're not going to be a victim a second time around.
Oh, hell no.
I mean, this is there are a lot of comparisons about how the Democrats get treated like the battered spouse, and I don't mean it in a funny way at all. They come back for this abuse and frankly this violence, and we see the behavior of Mike Lee and a lot of other big Republican names who are out there making fun of the assassinations in Minnesota. And today, when a Republican congressman who had been threatened by a guy with a Palestinian flag on his car, which is equally inappropriate, today they're like, oh, this is all the Democrats' fault for criticizing us for making jokes about murders in Minnesota. It's the insane doom loop of Democrats sometimes just makes my brain explode. Like, these people are not your friend anymore, guys.
No, and I just think on any given day, you would never want to associate yourself, let alone be friends with somebody who's just a walking hypocrite.
God,
right?
No.
Why, because you want to know why? Because when push comes to shove, you want to know that somebody has your back. And you would never trust that person would have your back. That is why voters and true democracy warriors, they want to have that match in Congress. They want to know that somebody is fighting for them in DC, that is not there just to, have the parking spot. Like, they want somebody who's actually going to be fighting for them. And that is why these No Kings protests were so important, right?
Huge.
It was, can we tempt the fates, and can we put ourselves out there? And look what happened. We had more than 10 million people getting together to do this. And that was just one day. And so I think about what Senator Padilla said when he did his floor speech, when he said, think about the power of millions of us if we just lift our voices together to do this. Because he said it right after the following line. He said, no one is going to come and save us. We have to save ourselves.
No one's coming to save us.
Nobody's going to come and save us, Rick. We have to save ourselves. So frankly, whoever we can find that's going to ally with us and be able to sit there and also kind of have our six, right? They have our back. those are the people that we need to uplift. And then the people that are betraying us, they need to be held to fucking account.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, I want to thank you so much for A, being an amazing voice in this community and on this platform. B, being my friend, and C, coming on the show today, and great conversation. Let's do this again soon.
Anytime. I'll see you
All
soon,
right.
Rick. Bye.
Yay. See ya.